Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Michael Igo. I'm a senior reporter with Devex, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to Devex at the UN Food Systems Pre-Summit. We have a really exciting 2 days planned, fantastic conversations. I, for one, am really looking forward to tuning in, and it's so great to have you all here. So thanks for joining. My main purpose in being here is to help set the stage for my colleague, Teresa Welsh, who's really the brains behind this operation and someone who covers food systems in depth regularly for Devex and has really been behind the scenes pulling this together. Teresa, great to see you.
Good to see you too, Michael. Thank you so much for that generous introduction. And I should also add, we have many other folks that you won't see here today that have been behind the scenes pulling this together as well.
That's right. You're the face of it. This really is a topic that is front and center for you. And even as recently as this week, you've been writing about some of the recent developments in the food systems world. I'm thinking specifically of the big report that came out, the state of food insecurity and nutrition in the world. Really pretty stark and striking findings there, including that nearly 12% of the global population faced severe food insecurity in 2020, more than 100 million people facing hunger. 100 million more people facing hunger last year than the year before. A lot of this obviously brought on by the pandemic, but only in a sense. I mean, I think the main takeaway from that report that you wrote about was that the pandemic didn't break the food system so much as reveal a food system that is broken. So the question now seems to be, what do we do about that? And presumably this summit is meant to be a big part of the answer to that question. I wonder if you could just start by sort of setting the scene for us. What are the expectations going into the summit in September, the pre-summit that's coming up later this month? Where are we in this process?
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right, Michael, that we really, with the release of Monday's SOFI report, are seeing exactly how stark these issues are. And we've been seeing rising hunger levels since 2014. So unfortunately, a rise this year is not out of the trend that we have been seeing. But as you mentioned, the pandemic really is revealing all of the ways that the food system is truly broken. And so this event was announced by the UN Secretary General on World Food Day in 2019. So it was planned pre-pandemic, but obviously is more relevant than ever because of all the things you just mentioned with the pandemic. And so we have this pre-summit at the end of this month, which sounds like a very UN term, does it not? A pre-summit to a summit.
Makes this the pre-summit, I believe.
Exactly, yes. Here at Devex, you're all joining us for the pre-summit. And so that event's happening in Rome. It's going to be a hybrid format. Obviously, the pandemic has complicated a lot of the organization of this event as well, right? Organizers had hopes that folks would all actually be physically gathering. Still remains to be seen exactly what will be happening in September as well. It was meant to be around UNGA when high-level folks are in New York and they could get really high-level participation at this event. So still a lot of balls up in the air with that. But there have been a whole host of folks that have really been working really hard over the past year plus on this entire systems event behind the scenes, working in a bunch of different action tracks, they're called, focusing on a bunch of different topics. So now is really sort of, we're getting to the moment of truth of seeing, okay, all of this work has been put in, dialogues have been hosted, input has been gathered, surveys have been taken, all of this has been collated. And so now we're getting to the moment of seeing, what are the actual outputs of all of this.
Fantastic. We're going to kick off with some audience interaction right away, and I have a poll to send out. We'd love to get your responses to this. Selecting from the phrases below, which I believe you should be able to see, what is the most important outcome you want to see out of the summit process? Concrete financial commitments from donors and country governments to improve food systems, agreements from multinationals to overhaul their practices to be more sustainable, policies passed at country level to improve access to healthy, nutritious food, or an overhaul of international trade practices to level the playing field for smallholder farmers? Big challenges there. We'll be fascinated to hear what you think. Teresa, we're running up against time already. So let me just ask you, can you give us a quick sense of who we're going to hear from over the next couple of days and how that sort of mix of people speaks to the way that this whole process is structured?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really excited about the program that we have for you all over the next 2 days, this morning and then tomorrow morning as well. So we'll be hearing from a host of folks that have been intimately involved in the summit planning process. We'll have a conversation today with 2 of the action track leads. So they've had their hands in a lot of this. We'll also be hearing from farmers, from chefs, from people that are on the ground working every day in the food system. We'll be hearing today as well from a representative of the Global People's Summit. We'll be talking a little bit about some of the controversy surrounding the UN Food Systems Summit. There have been people that don't feel this process is as inclusive as perhaps they want it to be. And so we'll be hearing from people that have, direct roles in the process, but also just people that are, living their lives, doing their work, and in the food systems every day. And so I'm really excited to hear from this host of folks. We've got a lot of really great conversations planned for you all.
Great. And very quickly, by just a hair, our most popular response was that people hope to see policies passed at country level to improve access to healthy, nutritious food. So a focus on countries. That's great to hear. Teresa, anything else that we need to know before we kick off?
Yeah, definitely. Just a couple of admin things for everyone before we get to our first conversation. We want to thank our partners for this event, International Fund for Agricultural Development and the Atlas Network. Thanks so much to both of them. We also want to thank you, the audience, for submitting questions ahead of time. You all had the opportunity to do that when you registered for this event. So we'll be incorporating some of those throughout our conversations on both days. So we always look forward to having your input. Feel free to jump into the chat in Zoom, introduce yourselves, let us know where you're joining from. We would love to hear from you. And you also hopefully have noticed that we have interpretation available for this event into Spanish and French. So obviously take advantage of either of those if you so desire. And then one quick last thing, we will be launching here at Devex a food systems newsletter in the coming months. So look out for more information about that. And we will be gathering more feedback from you all, our Devex audience, about what you want to be seeing with that. So I think that is all. Thank you so much, Michael. And we are ready to dive into our first conversation.
And I'll see you on the other side.
Sounds great. I am so thrilled to have joining us for today's first conversation, David Nabarro, who wears many hats. We're so thrilled to have you with us. You're just the perfect person to set the stage for our 2-day event ahead of the pre-summit. So thank you so much for joining us, David. It's great to see you. And
it's lovely to be here. Just I have to interrupt you because Teresa, you and me have done a few of these before, but this is the big one. And so I'm really glad to be with you for this moment.
Thank you so much. I know it's been quite a busy time, and obviously we are just ahead of the pre-summit itself. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this particular moment that we find ourselves in. Why is now the time for this UN Food Systems Summit? Obviously pre-summit this month, summit itself in September. Why is now the time that we need this?
Thanks for asking. In 2015, world leaders came together and agreed on an extraordinarily far-reaching plan for the future of our world and her peoples. It's the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It's the only plan we have for the future. And it's a plan that looks at human development, economic development, and environmental development, all wrapped up together. There are 17 goals and 169 targets. And for most of those here with us today, these are super familiar. But I think it's important that I stress to you that that whole sustainable development agenda is a very new and a very important creation. We don't have another world, so we have to look after this world carefully. And we don't have another plan for the future of the world, so we need to pay attention to that plan. But what's really important about the 2030 agenda, the plan I'm referring to, with its 17 sustainable development goals, is that all world leaders have agreed it, and many countries are using the sustainable development goals as their compass for where they're trying to get to. Now, there's one big problem, Teresa, and that is that if we go on as we are right now, particularly with regard to food and energy, it's going to be really hard for the world to achieve the SDGs, which means that the prospects for our grandchildren's generation and the generations that follow them don't look so good. So as we look ahead and consider our legacy and the world that we will be leaving, we have to really focus on the big issues that are still not properly resolved. One of those is food. Quite simply, if we get food right, then the SDGs will be achieved. If we get food wrong, then actually it's going to be very hard indeed to have the world that we need and want for the future.
I think that is such a perfect summary of the moment we find ourselves in, and the stakes really, of the SDGs themselves. You also, one of your many hats has obviously been involved with the response to the COVID pandemic as well. Yeah. And from your perspective, what has that done to, this urgency that you just laid out that, frankly, we were feeling before we had a global pandemic, and now we have COVID on top of everything else?
And COVID, honestly, is focusing minds everywhere in the most extraordinary way. I don't think it necessarily means that suddenly everything can be solved, however remarkable that would be. But what it is doing, no, but it is showing us, Teresa, really the enormity of the challenges that are faced, particularly by poorer people in our world. Because what we see as a result of COVID is just the enormous number of people who are performing key functions on which all of us depend, but who generally tend to be invisible. The thousands and thousands of people who are migrant workers helping to produce the food that we eat, harvesting it from the fields, or the many thousands who actually prepare the livestock products that are consumed, cutting up meat so that it can be sold, often in very difficult circumstances, or the people involved in transportation of food, or the people involved in getting the supermarkets working. Added all together, there are hundreds of millions of people working on food that we tend not to see, that we tend not to hear about. But during COVID, we realized how massively important they are. They were the essential workers who had to keep working, even though the rest of us were actually staying at home to try to avoid getting the disease. But they are often poorly paid. They often live in quite unsatisfactory circumstances. And they tend to be people who've come into countries from outside, perhaps as part of labor gangs, and they don't always have very good living conditions. Sometimes they have to actually go right out on a limb to negotiate better living and working conditions. So what's happened is COVID has reminded us these people are there, because many of them got super sick, particularly early on when there were problems in processing factories for meat and fish and vegetables and sandwich making and so on. So what COVID does is it tends to reveal difficulties. And that was just one example. We've also seen COVID revealing the challenges faced by farmers in getting to market. We've seen COVID reminding us just how hard it is for poor people to get food when they suddenly ran out of money. This happened when many countries went into lockdown last year. Altogether, COVID is the great revealer. And I think that's why so many countries really want this food Systems Summit to be a success, because it's been a big wake-up call, COVID, and they want to get things right.
And as you are looking ahead and looking at the outcomes that you want to see out of this summit, whether it's, you know, on behalf of multilateral organizations or the country governments you just mentioned, what are some of the outcomes that you are looking for out of this entire process?
Number one, food is more than what we grow or what the Ministry of Agriculture is focused on. It's vital what the agriculture sector does, but food also touches health. Food touches environment. Food touches everything to do with gender. Food is very important for young people, mostly because they're not going into food in quite the number that they ought to. So first thing is, let's treat food as an issue that goes right across different sectors of government. Perhaps the most important sector that's got to be there is the health sector, because if we don't get food right, it can make us sick. Second, I want to be sure that all the different stakeholders who have a role in food are really realizing that they are systems actors and they've got to be involved in it. Thirdly, I want us to be comfortable about treating food as a systems issue, one where so many different issues are deeply interconnected. And lastly, I want to be sure that in our food work, we put poorer people right at the center. The people whose children are likely to get malnourished, the people who are not able to hold down jobs, the people who are struggling sometimes just to get enough money to keep themselves from day to day. Let's get them at the center. Let's try to make sure that food systems serve them and their children, and make sure then that we're actually creating a community that is healthier, better nourished, stronger, looking after the planet in a more steward-like way. Let's get all that right, and let's get this summit to help us get in that direction. You know, Teresa, there's never been a food systems summit before, organized by the United Nations. It's time to have one. And I think on the basis of what I'm seeing from around the world, particularly through the food systems dialogues, that this will actually happen, and we will start to treat food truly as a systems issue.
And unfortunately, we've only got 30 seconds left, so this is a big question for only 30 seconds. But how is the global community going to track the commitments made at the summit, and how will we determine if this whole process has been a success?
So short, we'll do it within the context of the existing tracking mechanisms that we have, the high-level political forum, but I suspect countries and other stakeholders will introduce new trackers so that we have special food trackers. It wouldn't surprise me. We need it. They have to work out how to do it. But don't you worry. Things won't be the same after the summit in September this year. They'll be better.
Thank you so much, David, for those words. This was a great way to start out our event. I am so pleased you could join us today. Thank you so much.
Always my pleasure. You know, I'm such a fan of Devex, and invite me again, please.
Oh, we certainly will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us for what I think is going to be an interesting conversation on building local resilience. Today we're joined by four very interesting panelists. We've got Dr. Shakuntala Thilsted, Global Lead for Nutrition and Public Health at World Fish, as well as Elijah Amu Ador, Founder and Executive Director for Food for All Africa Program, Maria Canto, Environmental Undersecretary at the Municipality of Rosario in Argentina, as well as Nyasha Mundukuti, who's a Zimbabwean farmer and Cornell Alliance for Science Global Leadership Fellowship. Thank you so much for joining us. And my name is Rumbi. I'm an associate editor here at Devex. So at the moment, we don't have Elijah, but I assume he'll be joining us soon. But I'm just going to start by asking you, Shakuntala. So discussions around the pre-summit are mostly going to be around equity and sustainability. How important is equity and sustainability?
Having me, Rumbi. As you know, where we are now and where we started with the with the UN Food Systems Summit, we began by having, and still have, 5 action tracks. And one of those action tracks, Action Track 4, is particularly people-focused. So it deals with advance equitable livelihoods, and the focus is on women, indigenous peoples, and youth. Not that it's not everyone else, but these are the 3 focus groups that the partners have agreed to work with. But when you look across the Food Systems Summit, food systems in itself contain elements which deal with people across the food systems, from those who produce to those who consume, and also those who waste foods. So it's very much based on the people-centered approach. It's very much based on the resilience and sustainability of food systems, and using the whole framework and all the elements of the food system. And I do hope that in the summit we have already very many different categories and groups of people from very many different nations, from very many different sectors, from many different levels of society. And I do hope that we will be able to hear the voices of all these different groups of peoples, not only listen to the voices, but be able to get from them the solutions and the ideas that we should use to frame the Food System Summit, so that the summit really lives up to being a people summit, and being able to take into consideration not only the issues that people face, but the solutions that they would like to see be put in place to solve these issues.
Oh, thank you so much for that. So you mentioned local voices and getting all these voices heard. Maria, how important is it to ensure that these local voices are heard?
Hello, Rumbi. Thank you. Yes, this is really important for us in our experience. We have to know that through empowerment and through participatory processes, we have to work to have a sustainable food system. In our cities, the way we've been working, to really sustain and have really connection with the city, because we have to have technical support, we have to have political support, but without the workers, the farmers, and the people that are having co-benefits from the social aspect, from the economical aspect, and as well from the climate change adaptation and resilience, we wouldn't be able to have a sustainable food system. And that's why we work in urban agriculture and peri-urban agriculture to really produce food inside of the city.
Thank you. And at this point, I think I'm just going to take an audience question. We've got a question coming in from Liberata Kawamala. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I'm going to pose this one to you, Nyasha, because I think it actually speaks to your experience. So would you say that her question is, does the environmental activist in Africa, are they given an opportunity to take part in food security policy, would you say?
How do I tackle that? That's a question that is very difficult to answer, if I can say, because if you look at the environmental policies in Africa right now, most of the governance concerning these policies and practices, we have people who are not much knowledgeable about what's happening on the ground, about the science as well. So if I look back, especially at my country, so I've been more active on the side of science and agriculture. So we do talk about the use of science in helping us have a sustainable environment. But you realize that we have policymakers who are not making the right decision based on the science, based on the facts. So we need to give these young environmental scientists who are coming up a platform so that they can air out their views, air out what they have learned that can help the community and society. So one way that we can have environmentalists coming in is to let them work on the ground. So being heard sometimes is not influencing the bigger party as in a bigger policy, but I think they can work on the smaller ground in their communities and be effective in them. When you speak to your people, they understand you. they hear what you're saying because you can relate to their environment, you can relate to their societal beliefs, you can relate to the norms and cultures of that indigenous community. So environmentalist, in as much as it's an impact, I feel like an impact can be local, but with a global mindset. So we need them on the ground to make that impact on the ground. Then we can be able to say, from that small impact, it scales up till we can see policies changing at a higher level. But really having young people and having our environmental young people influencing the policy side of things is a hard challenge for upcoming African environmentalists. It's really hard because it's hard breaking through the barriers of when you realize that agriculture has been politicized, you know, so it's a hard environment for them to pave that and make a way and be leaders in the environmental sectors that they can be here. But I feel like as a young person as well, taking up the arms to say, this is where we are with agriculture, but this is the future that we want to see with agriculture in a sustainable way, we can also work on local scale. So I advocate mostly on having young people and having those young environmentals, enthusiastic environmentals, working on the ground with the people. They can make an impact on the ground in rural villages. So just one person is enough to make a ripple effect for us to make a change for the world.
Yeah, and I know that that's actually the work that you've been doing a lot of work on the ground. And actually all of you here have been doing a lot of work in terms of building resilience on the ground. And then COVID-19 happened. So what impact has COVID-19 had on the work that you're doing? And I'll just ask each one of you, but I'll start with you, Shakuntala.
Well, the disruptions of COVID-19 have been quite disastrous for many people. And then at one point in time, we thought that we were in a stage of recovery. And now we see in many places where I work, Asia, Africa, not so much in the Pacific, but Asia and Africa, that there are, there are new waves and new disruptions. And what I think is very trying and very sad to see is the effect it's having on people, because the people who we work with, they have their families, they have their children, they have their whole network that they should be taking care of. And if we would come to them and just talk work, that's not going to suffice in the climate that we have today. So if I would look at where we are today, I would very much like that governments and other development partners think about those who are falling behind and really put into place very strong programs, social network programs, school feeding programs, mother and child health care programs, really vamp up the programs that governments and international local partners can put into place, so that we ensure that we do not have people falling behind, and that we make sure that what we are doing and leading up to the Food System Summit and beyond, that no one is left behind. And we take into consideration a right-based approach. And if we would take into consideration a right-based approach, then we would truly know that we have to have solutions that work for everyone. Different solutions, but must work for everyone. And it's going to be disastrous if we do not put into place now and here and large programs to ensure that we do not have too many falling behind.
Yeah. And at this point, Maria, I just want to bring you in. So what impact has COVID had on the work that you're doing?
Yes, I think that this has brought us many, many challenges, but also some things that we can learn of. For example, a big issue for us was food security. At one moment, we weren't sure if the transport inside of the country was going to be stopped. And most of the vegetables we consume in the city, we are a city of 1 million people, come from many kilometers away. So the issue of food security really got bigger and bigger. Happily, that did not happen. But I think that we have to continue having more and more urban and peri-urban agriculture near to our cities. So at least part of the food that we consume, we can have it a few kilometers away. That this obviously help us with the greenhouse gases emissions. We have a lot of studies reporting that this has a great impact. And another thing that changed as well is that many people were in their homes and starting to realize about issues related to climate change and environment. So we helped to have many people have vegetable gardens in their houses and composting. So we gave seeds, we gave training. So we have now more than 2,000 people that have vegetable gardens in the houses. And also we had to adapt to have virtual farmer markets. We have farmer markets for the local produce we have, and we had to adapt with the farmers to have different ways of selling. So I think this has brought many challenges, but we have to learn to really think about our city, how we can produce inside of our city and have more green spaces so that we can be resilient also to floods and future crisis that we may have. Having green infrastructure in the city is a great advantage.
Thank you. And I like that idea of we had a lot of challenges, but it also brought about some very innovative solutions, which is quite interesting. So Nyasha, what disruptions have you seen happening on the ground? And I know this is something that you're actually quite passionate about. What role can technology play in sort of solving these problems looking ahead?
Okay. So I think I'll give you a personal experience that I had with COVID. So I was working in New York with the Alliance for Science when the shutdown started in Zimbabwe. So I have family back home in Zimbabwe. And I remember calling my little sister, like, just checking on them, like, are they okay? Do they have enough food? And she was on a queue, like a big queue for Millie Meal. That day she was on a queue for Millie Meal. These queues were going on when there was a shutdown. People wanted still to feed, even if there's a lockdown. People wanted food at the end of the day. So for me, there were no 6 feet apart. There were no COVID measures that were taking place because people were hungry. They needed food in their stomachs. It was now more of a stomach issue now. So I remember calling her and she's telling me she needs to send food back home to my mother, who's also a farmer. So I grew up on a farm with my mother who farms. So it was that state for me realizing that things have shifted. It used to be the village people, the rural areas who would supply food to us in the cities. When I used to go to college, my mom would send me a packet of Millie Meal, a packet of sweet potatoes that I would go with. But now my sister had to make sure that she is well fed because the crops were not doing well. But also at the end of the day, it was a shift for me to realize that in as much as we are scared of the COVID virus that is out there, there's a bigger virus that is silent, that is killing each and every day, whether there is COVID or not. There is a hunger virus that is going on. It's a silent killer, and we've been talking about it, but now it's made big now because of the COVID virus, the COVID that is happening. So in that area, it really shifted my view of how we view agriculture. And I think for a lot of people that at the end of the day, we still need quality food, we still need good nutrition, we still need to feed. And one way that we can combat COVID is actually with good nutrition. So agriculture is quite really important at this point when we're dealing with COVID. Though the talk more is about COVID, we forget the nutrition side of it. We forget the feeding part of it, where your body needs to fight with vitamins. Your body needs to fight with all the micronutrients that you need. So it's food, right? But when it comes to being with the Alliance, we talk more on science. We talk more on climate resilient crops. We talk more on and letting these technologies be accessible to every farmer, to everyone. Let them make a choice that they want to use biotechnology or not. Let them have the access to those innovations and technologies in the world that other farmers are benefiting from. But you realize that during this COVID pandemic, we had more scientists on Facebook, more scientists in our communities than the actual scientists who are doing the work. So when the COVID came out, people got scared about technology. I couldn't talk about biotechnology to some of my friends because they were scared of microchips. They were scared of what's going to happen, this manufactured virus. So I work in a science field that deals with food. And when you talk about food, it's a very delicate issue because people eat food. People are emotional with their food. So you don't play around with people's food. So for me, I realized that talking about science and food and COVID in one sentence wasn't going to work for us. It was really hard because people didn't trust the scientists. Even if I'm here in America, right? But you could realize that there were different views on COVID pandemic, even with the scientists and the politicians. And so where do we go from there if we cannot trust the scientists? Where do we go from there? How do we benefit from and leverage from the science that we have? So it was a difficult space to be now when we're saying, okay, we need to talk about biotechnology in agriculture. We need to talk about these innovations that are good in agriculture. But how do we do that when people are scared of the science right now? People are scared that it's been manufactured. People are scared that we're all going to die. People are scared of the 5G, 4G, everything. People are scared of this technology. So the past year, honestly, the conversations about biotechnology have been low, if I can say it. Have been low. But the good thing now is you educate people, you let them make informed choices. I talk about informed choices because it's one thing for me to just tell you this is good, but without really addressing your fears. You know, we need to acknowledge the fears that the public has. Even the farmers, they have fears when accepting this technology. You're not just saying, yeah, we have this new technology, take it and impose it on them. You need to explain to them and you need to address their fears. They're scared. What is it going to change about their everyday life? So we need to address those fears. So for us, it was really lowering down to them. To someone who doesn't even know science, you know, to scale down the science in order for you to make it more understandable to a lay person. So they understand that this is what we're doing. It's already being done. We're just adding 1, 2, 3. But then the advent of vaccines also played a big part for us. Then you realize that the science that they've been rejecting and mistrusting, they're changing their views about it. More people are now accepting the vaccines, right? Which is a good conversation for us because when we talk about the vaccine, there's biotechnology in the vaccines, there's mRNA technologies that is being used for those vaccines. So people who value their health, because no one wants to die. No one wants to die. So people will go and take the vaccine, you know. So now we have a starting point to say this biotechnology that you're rejecting or that you are seemingly not willingly to understand is actually the one that that's working for vaccine production, you know. So
I just need to interrupt you, Nyasha, because we're actually coming to the end of our sessions. I know this is really getting quite fascinating, but I also wanted to just get some final thoughts from all of you on what are each of you hoping to come out of this pre-summit? So I'm just going to start with you, Shakuntala, so that we can just have some final thoughts. And I think we only have time for a minute each.
So Rumi, it's going to be very difficult because with the pre-summit, we had hoped that we could be able to bring people together and bring many different groups of people together from different places, from different societies, but we won't be able to do that. So just getting finding the means of which the pre-summit can have relevance for all peoples. I think we are still working on that, and that's going to be difficult, and it's not easy. What I do hope is that we still find ways where we can bring the voices together. And as I said before, not just the voices together that tell about their issues, as Nyasha is talking about, but also using the voices, listening to the voices, listening to traditional knowledge, and finding how we can combine those in order to get the solutions that meet the needs and aspirations of all people. And that we can take these lessons from the pre-summit to the summit in September, which I hope is going to happen in September.
Fingers crossed.
Yes.
But Maria, so what are your hopes for this pre-summit?
Yes, I think it's also important to talk about what cities can do inside of the cities and in the areas surrounding cities. Also about the importance of sustained political efforts, sustained technical efforts, but obviously the connection with the civil society, with the people, with the local knowledge, as Shakuntala was mentioning. So bring it all together and not just being a thing for one government or the other, but really sustaining in the long run. So I think those are some issues we have to look out in the summit.
And Nyasha, your final thoughts? What are we hoping to see in this pre-summit?
Wow, yeah. I think Dr. Shakuntala mentioned something about people, you know. So when we talk about food systems, it's not a mechanic system that is not driven, that is just automatic. It's driven by people. So I really love the fact that she mentioned women, she mentioned indigenous people. I might forget it. Oh, she mentioned young people. She mentioned me. So, you know, she mentioned young people.
Yes, Nash, we have to look to you for the solutions.
Yes, because when we talk about this food system, it's from the seed to the table. So there's a value chain that encompasses a lot of people that we need to bring to the table. We need to bring everyone to the table, the researchers, the politicians, the farmers, the stakeholders. We need everyone on the table and have their voice heard. But one thing that I like focusing on the indigenous and women is that the indigenous people in our rural communities have been resilient. They've been resilient way before we knew, because it's just that it hasn't been documented. It wasn't written down. It wasn't filmed. So we don't really have it now to prove that these are the ways that they've been working out resilience in their communities. So I like that, including them to the discussion, bringing them to the table. We can listen, as what Dr. said, we can listen to how they were doing things. And then we can make sure that with the new ideas that we have, how do we merge these two? How do we merge these two to come up with a solution? So I'm all for including everyone and including the marginalized groups that we have mentioned, and having the talk and the discussion with them included, and see where we go from there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. This was like such an interesting conversation, and I wish we had more time. And we're hoping to see a very inclusive pre-summit, and our reporters will definitely be following this, and I know you guys will be following it. Thank you for the interesting conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rumi. Yeah, thank you. Thank you all.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
In agriculture, many farmers are still selling a product below the cost of sustainable production. If you don't have a decent income, you will have more human and environmental rights violations. My name is Marique de Peña, and I'm the managing director of a smallholder banana cooperative, Banelino, in the Dominican Republic. There was a very unstable market for smallholders in volume, but also in prices. So they really looked for a way how to strengthen themselves in the market. On top of low prices, banana farmers suffer significant losses due to climate change. COVID hasn't helped too much, which has increased also cost. The organic certification certifies the way we produce a product. So it's free of any chemicals. Fair trade is a certification that is very much built on decent livelihoods for farming families and access to basic needs as healthcare and education through a more sustainable way of trade. Banabino farmers are organic as well as fair trade, but also we started to walk away from monoculture. This way you can find better balance in the ecosystem, as well as you can add more value to your crop. We produce bananas, we have coconuts and cocoa. We also have fruit trees for family consumption and for local markets. Banana producers also now are doing beekeeping, which also give them an additional income. And we have introduced recently also animals like chickens. Due to COVID, we also feel that we need to be less dependent on only export markets, but need to grow our participation in local markets. I think there are many debates in Europe and in the world about unfair trading practices, but still it is not mentioned that paying a product below the cost of production is an unfair trading practice. So I think there need to be more awareness, but also regulations. Little by little, we are making progress towards living in income and living wages.
Hi, everyone. I'm Raj Kumar, President and Editor-in-Chief of Devex. And as we get toward the pre-summit for the Food Systems Summit, pre-summits in July, Food Systems Summit in September, we wanted to have a conversation about smallholder farmers in particular and where they fit in to the complex rubric that is food systems. And we have two fantastic people to join us for that discussion. Gilbert Hongbo, who is, of course, the president of the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And we have Ruramiso Mashumba, who's the National Youth Chairperson for the Zimbabwe Farmers Union. And I wanted to just begin with you, Gilbert, if I can. this food system summit, there's a lot of anticipation for it. What are you hoping will actually come out of it? You've been working on investing in rural communities, smallholder farmers for so many years. What do you actually think this summit is going to bring for your work?
I mean, when we start this whole initiative, first of all, thank you for having us on your show today. One thing that is very clear is to create a momentum because we know that the ODA for ag has been stalling at 5% or so for years, and that an investment, Ruramiso will certainly confirm, investment in ag still look like not the best. People don't see that as the most exciting thing. So for us, we want to really create a momentum, which is one. Secondly, is important serving the rural community and the smallholders who produce in Africa, for example, 80% of all the calorie intake. We want to make sure that they are at the center of the debate and making sure that all the failures, not only market failures, but all the failures throughout the value chain are identified and provided for. Thirdly, we're looking at that also from the perspective, not only in terms of food security, but the perspective also for food being a health issue and food being a source of decent employment and decent income generation. Those are some of the key things that we really are expecting from the Food System Summit. Over.
And maybe, Gilbert, as a good example, we have Ruramiso here who is on the farm and they haven't had electricity for a couple of days, which is why you're in your car, Ruramiso. We're hoping we'll keep you on for the duration of this. What do you think about smallholder farmers and the community you serve of smallholders? Where do they fit into this big conversation about food systems and what the summit is meant to tackle?
Okay, thank you for that question. So, you know, smallholder farmers produce most of the food that's eaten on the continent. And for so long, people have forgotten the importance of smallholder farmers in terms of even when we talk about regenerative agriculture. So it's very important to put them in the middle of this dialogue to see how can we together produce food with using less energy, as well as making sure that we still feed the same amount of people. Smallholder farmers are also affected most by things like climate change. We have been seeing the earth is getting more and more warmer, and what sort of tools are out there to make sure that smallholder farmers can access them so that they're able to produce food sustainably. So smallholder farmers really play a pivotal part in this discussion at the Food Summit.
Yeah, Gilbert, when I think of food systems, I mean, naturally, when you think of the idea of a big system, all the interconnected parts, maybe you think about large-scale agriculture. Where do the smallholders actually fit into the future of the food system from your perspective?
First of all, as I said, we have to keep in mind that the small-scale producers remain those that are producing most of the calorie intake on that. That was very clear. And we know that in low-income countries, including in Africa and Asia, we know that more than 60% of the population remain rural. And the global poverty, 80% of poverty is in a rural area. So we know that the answer of lifting up people from poverty will come through how we deal with the small-scale producers. So it's not, it is about, and it has to be about the small scale. Yes, it is also about the agribusiness, the commercial, the large scale. All of that are complementary. This is part of what we're trying to do here. Identify how we can create much more synergy between the small scale holders and the large producer being a market for the small scale producers. And the other way around, the innovation, the technology being made available and affordable for the small-scale producers. So, as Ruramiso have said, we can ensure not only inclusion, but sustainability in their endeavors.
Yeah, IFAD, in fact, is leading one of the action tracks. There's 5 action tracks at the summit. You're leading action track 4, which is advancing equitable livelihoods and value distribution, which is exactly what you just talked about. I wonder, Ruramiso, when you think about the idea of an equitable food system, what Gilbert and his colleagues at IFAD are trying to advance, what do you want to see come out of the summit to actually get us moving in that direction?
Okay, so what I would like to see come up a lot at this summit is the importance of smallholder farmers and how we can have action-based solutions. For so long, we've discussed the challenges that smallholders are faced with, and we've also discussed some solutions, but we haven't really had much action-based solutions. So if we can come out of this summit with action-based solutions on how exactly can we begin to bring in smallholder farmers to the table in terms of decision making, how can we make sure that smallholder farmers are part of this dialogue on regenerative agriculture? How can we ensure that smallholder farmers are not left behind and not using traditional methods of farming? And smallholder farmers are most affected by things like climate change. So we really need to focus on that and see what sort of methods are out there that we can support smallholder farmers to make sure that they are more climate resilient in this near future.
Gilbert, we asked our audience for questions, and we had an interesting question that came from Sami Khan at the CDC Group, one of the world's biggest development finance institutions. Sami directs strategy for the food and agribusiness sector, and basically says they've experienced that there aren't that many large-scale investment projects across Africa and in the ag space and the food space, and some of the bigger players, including multinational corporations, are still hesitant to invest in the continent. And he's wondering, is there anything we can do to catalyze some of these bigger players to get into and including regional players, into the food and agricultural projects in Africa at a larger scale, backed by DFIs like CDC, and to be more scalable and integrated and inclusive over the long term, including smallholder farmers? What do you want to see happen out of the summit that maybe will help drive some of those larger scale agricultural projects that include smallholders?
Clearly, one of our expectation is really to have much more finance made available to the small-scale producers. So rural finance is clearly one of the key things that we are pushing for. As a matter of fact, together with the Italian and the French, we really are pushing to really bring together all the public development bank so that together we can really have better synergy in financing agriculture for small scale to larger investment needed for the sector. In addition to the finance is the technology, as I was referring to. We need the innovation to get down there to the small scale producer so that they can improve their productivity and so that they can practice much more environment-friendly agriculture practices, ensure that we can reduce the food waste and loss and all the challenge we have throughout the value chain. So technology innovation is the second. To do that, we all have to work together. So in addition to the example I gave in terms of the Public Development Bank, we are also aware that there are a lot of initiatives that hopefully we're all going to discuss during the pre-summit here in Rome before getting to the summit in New York. Over.
Thank you, Gilbert. And Ruamiso, if you're still with us, and maybe she is not, I think we may have lost her. So let me come to you, Gilbert, with one additional question, and we can see if she's able to rejoin us. So Gilbert, we're getting close to the summit in Rome, where you're based. And then we'll have our major summit in September in the UN General Assembly. What are some action steps that can be taken in this period? Like what is your call to action to leaders, to the community, people who are going to be part of this summit, including farmers and smallholders, to make sure that their voices are heard in this debate, that they push this summit in the right direction? What's your call to action, Gilbert?
Listen, in terms of the voice, making sure the rural community, the small-scale holders' voice are heard, I must admit that it is already happening. As part of this process, the UN Special Envoy Secretariat, together with colleagues, including IFAD, we have been working very hard to create dialogues within country, national level, from different countries. But what I want to mention here is the dialogue we are organizing within the farmers organizations, the indigenous people, the youth, to make sure, first of all, that their voice are heard in that process, which is one. Secondly, the call for action is really coming out of the summit, not simply with a series of resolution or declaration, but with a concrete action plan. So I'm aware of a different group proposing different action that will be implemented post-summit. So my call is this summit to be an action-oriented summit with a proper follow-up and measurement of its success in the year to come. And that's different actions are different level from the not only for all the tracks from the scientific community, the humanitarian side. You have the school feeding that the WFP and others are initiating. You have a series of business community ways to make sure that we can improve the availability of seeds and fertilizers to the small scale producers. Something that is very, very close to my heart is the traceability in the food industry. I really will hope and calling for the leader to push to make sure that coffee producer in Colombia or in Cote d'Ivoire, that they receive at the end of the day a minimum evidence-based living income to make sure that they can continue living decently from their production of coffee, for example. So the
that should be possible today, right, Gilbert? I mean, with traceability, if you as a consumer know where you're buying your product from and you know where it's coming from, the whole chain, how people are treated along the way, that can be transformative.
That could be a transformative initiative. The traceability is one thing, but traceability linked to how much the coffee that you are paying in New York City at $5 or $4, how much of it is going to that small-scale coffee producer to start with? And we should be able to have that part of the label for the consumer to know, for example. So I'm also really pushing in that direction.
I think that's what's so powerful about the framing of this issue as a food system, right? We've had many UN summits on food and malnutrition and hunger. This is different because we're thinking about the entire system and how it's connected. And that, as you say, it becomes much more relevant to everyone on this planet, whether you live in a rural community or you just consume food that comes from a rural community. This matters to you.
And not only it's really across the board, and it's also across the SDGs. Obviously, when you talk about food, we talk automatically about poverty, SDG 1. We talk about women that that mostly in the rural area, the agriculture sector are women, and therefore the linkage with SDG 5, the SDG on climate change, the youth, the inequalities. So it's really across the bodies, the whole system. And also, why we insisted on that system approach is that some of the failure, although, and I made it clear that we really are pushing for much more finance and rural finance, but some of the failures are not necessarily finance related. So by looking at that, the system, the entirety of the systems, we can provide corrective actions and taking initiative to address some of the failure, which may not always require necessarily additional financing.
Well, we've lost Rura Miso, but I want to thank her. And maybe her situation is emblematic of what we're talking about, that she hasn't had electricity for a couple of days on her farm. These things are so connected, of course. But Rura Miso Mashumba, I want to thank her. I want to thank you, Gilbert Hungbo. And there's a lot of anticipation looking forward to the summit. You've helped to explain why it's so important. And we're looking forward to see what you and IFAD bring together in this action track number 4. Thank you for your time today, Gilbert.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me today.
Joining us now is Hakeem Balirene, who is the Africa representative to the Executive Committee of the People's Coalition on Food Sovereignty, which is a global network of different organizations and social movements that seek to develop and promote people's food sovereignty. Welcome, Hakeem. Thanks for being with us today. And what I want to hear from you, Hakeem, is a little bit about the organizational work that you are doing with PCFS on the Global People's Summit. And so for those who are not familiar with this event, can you tell us a little bit about it?
People's Coalition on Food Sovereignty is an organization comprised of different organizations from peasants, fisherfolk, advocates for food, the right to food, from the grassroots, the regional level. And these organizations came together in order to be able to fight for their food sovereignty.
And your organization has expressed some discontent with the process surrounding the UN Food System Summit. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the issues that you see and why you felt that the process has not been as inclusive as it needs to be?
Yeah, the global food system has been entrenched with a complex of architecture built on profit-driven and exploitation, operation, plunder, depriving food producers on their right to land and resources, starving the population amid abundance and pushing our planetary boundaries to a point of no return. So the transnational corporations and their lobbyists are constantly trying to squeeze every drop of profit in the food and agriculture sector by introducing more layers of corporate capture and also such that a public-private partnership, financializing digitalization. So by doing this, we feel that the UN food system was not inclusive and it was not fair, and the consultations were not enough, that our views were not captured. That's why we thought that we had to come up with another way of encountering the United Food System Summit by introducing the Global People's Summit.
And tell us a little bit more about that event. Do you know when it's going to be held, and how are you going about collecting feedback and encouraging participation from folks in your network, as well as people that may not be familiar with PCFS yet?
Yeah, the People's Summit had its objective. One of them was to register people's voice against corporate capture in the food and agriculture, and also increasing influence on agri-food corporations, and also in domestic and international decisions making, including but not limited to the UN World Economic Strategy Partnership, because Food and Agriculture Organization partnered with CropLife and CropLife. This one also haunted us, so we want to make sure that we encounter them by also introducing our own way of demanding for our right to food. Then the other one was to register the demand for people-centered food system anchored on the human right to food and right to land, resources, and food sovereignty and agroecology. So amongst two other things, we want to introduce the Global People's Summit on food system to the general public, and to encounter the event of the United Food System Summit. I'm so sorry. I keep on swallowing my words. Some of the proposed activities, as you asked, we already had a round table on the corporate capture on the food system, and we launched the Global People's Summit on the food system website. The online action is we also had the sustainable food consumption production workshop in Asia and Africa, and also to make sure that we are able to have what we've called a just, equitable, healthy, and sustainable food system. This means that we want everybody to be inclusive, especially the grassroots people, because the inclusivity in the beginning, in the 2019, when the United Food System partnered with the World Economic Summit, the other the transnational corporations captured the system. So we, the grassroots organization like me, a small-scale farmer, our voices was not captured. So we believe that by doing this, we shall be able to air out our views and our concerns, either they are captured and other supporters can come in during that, before and during the summit.
One of the terms that you just mentioned, Hakeem, is agroecology. And for people who aren't familiar with that word or term, can you tell us a little bit more about what it means and why it's at the center of your agenda at PCFS?
Agroecology is science, agroecology is movement, and agroecology is practice. Why do we say agroecology is practice? It is what we do every day. Why do we say it is science? It is because farmers or the producers are the center of doing everything every day. And whatever we do, it is done because we understand it and do it the way we feel it is the best. And it is a movement because it involves quite a number of characters. And this will be people, the macro, micro organisms, and this will mean even the waters, the land. So agroecology cares for the earth, agroecology cares for the people and all the living organisms. So why do we believe that agroecology can take on as the best food system, as the best way or the best narrative, which the food system, which should be the best food system? It is because it is at the center of everything. So as we people under PCFS, we really believe that if the food system, if the best food system is, if the best way of taking ahead the food system would be through agroecology, because it gives us the power to own the whole food chain from production to fork. It will give us the mandate to be able to determine our policy to produce, our policy to market, our policy to control the natural resources, our policy to have everything on our own. It will give us the mandate to own the whole food system or the whole food value chain, as I mentioned in the beginning. That's why we believe that if it is to be taken if the United Food System Summit is to discuss, more emphasis should be put on agroecology. And if it is to be put at agroecology, it is the best way to go because it is tried, tested, and has stood the test of time. So agroecology is the best narrative which can produce sustainable food, which is healthy, which is just, equitable, and it is sustainable. That's why we really believe that that is the best way we can go about agroecology in the United Food System Summit.
And
yes.
Hakeem, we've got just 1 minute left, but you're joining us today from Uganda. And as a smallholder farmer, excuse me, where you are, what is the largest change that you want to see out of this process, for your daily life and for your operations? What do you want to see out of this Global People's Summit?
Actually, I as a small-scale farmer, I'm so happy that I'm part of this Global People's Summit. Why? Because it has given us space to speak out our ideas and ideologies, our innovations. All of what we do has been brought on board for people to understand, and those who will be listening and those who will hear on what we are talking about here today will know that we exist. For us, we usually say, without us is not ours. That means that where our voices are not, whatever is being made, it is not about us. It is about those who are making it. So the People's Global Summit has given us the opportunity to make sure that we air out our views and concerns, in that those policy makers from all levels can be heard. So me as a small-scale farmer from Uganda, I do believe that during this People's Global Summit space, we shall be able to air out our issues, concerns, and those who are supposed to hear it, hear. And if they are to act, they act in the sense that those are the things we want to be worked upon.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. But Hakeem, thank you so much for joining us today and telling us a little bit more about the Global People's Summit. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you very much. We remain by saying that we want a just, equitable, healthy, and sustainable food system. That's the way we want, and that's the food. The food we want should be produced agroecologically. Thank you for giving us the opportunity from People's Coalition for Food Sovereignty. I remain Marianne Hakim from Eastern and Southern Africa Small Scale Farmers Forum, the chairperson. Thank you.
I'm so pleased to have joining us the leaders of 2 of the UN Food Systems Summit action tracks to tell us a little bit more about that process and all of the work that they have been up to over the last year. I'm pleased to have with us Action Track 4 leader. The chair is Michelle Nunn. She's the president and CEO of CARE USA. And we also have with us Salim Hook, who is the director of International Center for Climate Change and Development, and who is chairing Action Track 5. Welcome to you both.
Hello there.
Thank you so much for joining us today. So I'd love to start out with a brief overview of the action track process. Tell us a little bit about how you have been working together and how you have approached the summit in these sort of 5 areas and why those areas were selected and how that's helped you work through all of the diversity of food systems issues that we're talking about with this summit. Michelle, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think that, I would first of all say that these action tracks have been populated by literally thousands of voices. And I think we would all agree that it has been an extraordinary kind of civic experience to be a part of this, because we have experts and we have people who are practitioners, and we have people who are actually workers within food systems and farmers and fisher folk who have been, I would say, around this table of these action tracks. So I think that's one dimension that's really important to understand. I think another piece that's really important to understand is that these action tracks, I think we recognize that food systems are integrated and we can tackle hunger, but that it needs to also take into consideration sustainability and climate change and livelihoods within food systems. And so that is what we know is really key to this, is bringing people together across those differences. So, that integration, that constellation of many participants, and I think also the focus on action orientation. They're called action tracks, and I think that that this has been an exercise in actually turning ideas into solutions.
And Salim, tell us a little bit from your perspective, coming at it from the climate change aspect of the food system, and what it's been like for you to interact with folks that maybe aren't strictly climate change people, but fall into some of these other action track buckets.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So just building on Michelle's earlier comments about the architecture of the UN Food System Summit, a couple of other points to, I think, note. It's not a typical summit where governments are going to negotiate an agreement on paper, and that's the outcome of the summit. The agreements are already assumed to have been done with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the 2 Paris Agreement goals on climate change. And what we have been charged with doing is coming up with ways of implementing those. And as Michelle said, listening to people from all over the world, it's a people's summit in that sense, and to bring in ideas of actions, of implementing what we have already agreed over the coming 10 years to the 2030 timeline. So the outcome of the summit in September is not the end, but the beginning of actions that will take place over the coming 9.5 years left, and building coalitions of governments, private sector, big private sector, small private sector, farmers, fishers, herders, youth, women, indigenous people, all kinds of stakeholders from all over the world at global, regional, and national and local levels as well. And that's the challenge for all of us. And we've been very excited to be working together, even though we have 5 tracks. I'm track number 5. Michelle is track number 4. We've been working very, very closely together because it's a food systems summit where we have to look across the different areas and make sure that we are connecting them going forward. So it's been very exciting and in my view, a tremendous opportunity of doing things differently and doing things that are going to be action-oriented rather than just agreeing on pieces of paper.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important perspective, right? Is what are the actual outcomes of this, and what are the actionable things that can be done out of this process? And I think a lot of the important work you all have been doing is breaking down the silos amongst all of these different areas of the food system. And Lawrence Haddad, who's the chair of another action track, who unfortunately wasn't able to be with us today, has said to me in the past, you know, talking a little bit about this process, he's traditionally focused on nutrition issues. And he said, you know, I've never talked to so many climate people in my life as part of this process. And, you know, he's finding himself, he said, you know, I'm finding myself in, you know, virtual rooms now with, you know, people that I've never interacted with before. And that's the whole purpose of this process, right? Is to get people together having these conversations that maybe traditionally haven't seen themselves as allies or, you know, even having to do with the same issues. But Salim, you also mentioned some of the challenges. And obviously this is a massive agenda that we're talking about. It was going to be one even before the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, now we're also dealing with that. So I'd love to hear from you both, you know, what are the major challenges that you've encountered over this process as you've all been working together over the last year? Salim, let's start with you this time.
Sure. So one of the important elements of this process that we've undertaken for the summit is a whole series of national dialogues taking place in every country around the world. And these national dialogues are taking place in different countries at different levels with different stakeholders. Again, taking food systems as a systems approach and not just one Ministry of Agriculture, for example, on food production, but across government and across other stakeholders as well. Some of those dialogues have had difficulty doing them on the ground with the people involved. But they've tried to do it online, virtually. All of us at the global level have been doing all our meetings virtually. And I'm actually quite pleased by how well we've been able to do that. There's obviously not 100% ability of everybody to engage in these virtual meetings. But I was actually quite pleasantly surprised by how many grassroots level groups do have access to the internet and were able to participate in these virtual meetings. So there are some, I think, unintended benefits of doing things virtually, in that we do actually get quite a lot of global coverage in terms of the conversations we've had. And best of all, we haven't had to fly around the world for the last year, burning up a lot of big, increasing our carbon footprint as well. So I think as far as carbon footprints go, this is quite a good summit to recommend to people.
And that is always the challenge of all of these processes, right? Whether it's the UN or, you know, anything we're doing on a global level, is to ensure everyone can be a part of the conversation, because not everyone, back in the old days when we were all flying around, not everyone can be doing that. And yes, there are still some connectivity challenges as well, you know, to get folks involved online. Michelle, from your perspective, what are some of the challenges of, you know, this process, whether it's content wise or also sort of those networking and connection challenges, and what it's been like to, you know, do all of this virtually without, you know, actually being able to convene in person?
Thank you. I think there's both a democratizing capacity, as Salim well articulated, in terms of everybody being able to participate in Indonesia and Sri Lanka, in Des Moines. But at the same time, there are people who don't have access, and many of the people that we want to engage. And so I think we'll continue to juggle those realities. I would say, look, this is a process that is engaging hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And if you imagine, we sometimes use the metaphor of coming around a table and actually preparing a meal together and everybody sitting around that table. It is really hard logistically and in terms of creating space for all of these different people with divergent views to come together. And so, whenever you set a table and you create the opportunity for a conversation, there are going to be arguments around the table. And there are, hopefully, though, it's the opportunity to stay in the space, to stay at the table, and to include as many voices as possible, and then to also get up from the table and to have some very specific ways of moving forward together. And ultimately, I think that's the big challenge for the summit is, and I think we've done a pretty good job of again bringing people together around that table, but then coming together around some agreements and turning that into action is the next challenge as we go forward. And I would say also that there are so many streams of food systems, right? And so how do you weave together the solutions for climate, for nutrition, for livelihood in a way that is comprehensive and integrated and not siloed? And yet also is actually action oriented and is specific. So those are all, I think, to be expected in terms of the challenges of such a major and I think very audacious undertaking. But I think we can be energized and excited about going forward into the pre-summit and into the summit. And then, Teresa, as you've articulated as well, really thinking about how that goes on to create meaningful change in the world.
And Michelle, you mentioned some of the obvious, propensity for disagreement when you've got lots of folks coming together on all of these issues, right? You're not going to have everybody having the same view. I'd love to hear from both of you, perhaps something that you really learned from someone in another action track, or something that you hadn't really been thinking about or hadn't quite occurred to you when you think about food systems and this process of everyone coming together has really made you realize, there are these certain connections that perhaps I hadn't been thinking about before. Salim, let me know if anything comes to mind for you.
Sure. So thank you very much. Excellent question, Teresa. So let me start by saying I actually don't come from the food world. I come from the climate world. And, I had to be
You're one of those climate people that Lawrence hasn't been talking to.
Exactly. Although I happen to know Lawrence from before, but he's right. I had to have my arm twisted to get into this because I wasn't quite sure what I was getting into. And I was persuaded that, resilience, the track I was asked to do, was about food system resilience to climate. And so there's a lot of commonality. And I've actually found that. So, one of the great pleasures of my working in this food system summit has been meeting a lot of people that I didn't know before, quite rightly, working on different aspects of the food system. And I think the biggest learning for me was thinking about the complexity and learning about the complexity of the food system from producing it in one part of the world and then consuming it in either the same country or in another country across the world, linking consumers to producers in a way that almost nothing else does. Food does bring us together. And I like Michelle's metaphor of, cooking together and eating together. This is really a basic human activity that every single person, no matter how rich or how poor on the planet, does involve in and brings us together. And it's a uniting factor. So to me, this was a learning issue. The other aspect of it was on the negative side, given that we are, going through the COVID-19 pandemic at the same time as doing this summit, the pandemic has shown how fragile and not fit for purpose the food systems are. People are suffering from not being able to get food. Farmers are suffering not being able to sell, and consumers are suffering not being able to eat. And so the food system that we had before the pandemic was certainly not resilient. And we are hoping that the food system we can develop after the summit can be resilient to pandemics and other kinds of stresses that will come, particularly climate change, which is the one I'm most concerned about.
Thanks, Salim. How about for you, Michelle? What were some of the challenges or surprises that you encountered during this process that made you change the way you think about food systems?
Yeah, well, and I'm like Salim. I don't come from a PhD in agroeconomy, and I this is not my. I have a background in civic and development and community engagement, and so I think one of the things that's interesting is the recognition of certainly very strongly divergent points of view, even within a set of actors that are all trying to create positive change, just have different vantage points around how to get there. So again, if we keep using our dinner table metaphor, I think of that, most of my big family dinner conversations don't have everybody agreeing, but they do have people when we're at our best, in which we're learning from one another and exchanging, and hopefully finding some reconciliation. So for me, to try and find how do we take scientific knowledge and make sure it's paired with indigenous experience and knowledge. How do we take the importance of localization and really having food systems oriented towards the local in all possible ways, with scale as an example, and the capacity to feed billions of people. And so I think that if we can find ways of having these conversations and also finding ways of listening to one another, even across disagreements, that we can and will be richer. And I think we'll see that coming out of the summit.
And let us talk about what we want to see coming out of this summit. You guys have put in an immense amount of work with your fellow action track leads, leading into the pre-summit that we'll have later this month, obviously summit itself in September. What would you see coming out of this process? What does success look like, and how do we measure that? Salim.
So my view of success are three things. Some action areas that are actually implementable, things we can do and agree to do. And I'm sure we've already got a whole bunch of them that we are going to be taking to the pre-summit. They will then be subject to discussions, and member states of the UN finally being the arbiter of which ones get endorsed to the summit and then beyond the summit. But nevertheless, whether they are officially endorsed or not, we have a number of very interesting actions that we have identified. And even more important than the actions, we have put together coalitions of actors ranging from member states, heads of government, to governments and private sector, consumers, indigenous groups, farmers groups, fishers and herders from different parts of the world at global, regional, and national and even local scales around the world, that I think is very, very new and novel, and has a huge amount of energy behind them to take actions going forward after the summit. So to me, this is an innovative summit in the sense that it is about launching actions, not about agreeing something that governments then go home and do on their own. It's something that we will be doing together. And I am absolutely certain that we'll have a bunch of very, very good actions. Obviously, my heart is in the food system and climate change arena, but that's not the only one. And we hope that we will have a bunch of very good ones going forward. We don't know the exact number of them, but I'm pretty sure we'll have a bunch of very, very good ones going forward.
And Michelle, how about for you? What are you looking for coming out of this process?
Well, I think Salim and I are both oriented towards action. We're leading action tracks, so we want to see, I think, concrete systems change. I mean, it's called a system, a systems and a summit for a reason. And I think it's to change systems and to also bring millions of more people into this conversation and into collective action. So I think, again, I think I'll feel excited if we see very specific policy change endorsed by governments, if we see coalitions that will have long-term platforms for action, and that are bringing to bear, again, very specific systems change. And if we see an ongoing platform for the kinds of cross-fertilization of people across nutrition and climate change that will continue to act together to create the kind of momentum that we need to meet the sustainable development goals that we set for ourselves, and that this becomes not an incremental but perhaps a giant step forward in our achievement aspiration and momentum.
Well, that seems like a perfect way to end our conversation. We are out of time. Thank you so much to both of you for being with us today and sharing a little bit about the action track process. I look forward to staying in touch and continuing all of these conversations as we go into the pre-summit and then the summit itself. So thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Hello again. This is Michael Igo with Devex, back here with Teresa. Just after an incredibly rich couple of hours, I can't believe how much I learned in that short amount of time.
We really packed it in there, didn't we?
Yeah, you did. And you also really demystified this process that I think is very kind of difficult to wrap your head around from the outside. I mean, there's so many things that jumped out to me. One, obviously the sort of context of COVID-19, the way that that's served as a real test for food systems, but has also brought new attention, I think, to the food system and to its various components that haven't always received the attention that they deserve. We sort of, in a lot of cases, tend to take these things for granted. And then also changing the sort of social context that food systems operate in with people's understandings or trust in science, things like that. Just really kind of fascinating, challenging issues to confront, and some calls for, of course, real financing, particularly for rural agriculture. But I'm curious, Teresa, what jumped out to you?
Yeah, well, I think this was a great way to sort of set the stage and really dig in on these conversations. And I loved hearing from folks that represent so many different aspects of the food system. Because like you said, I think we don't think of this always as a system, and that can sound really wonky, and people always, aren't sure exactly what that means. But I do think that, our first day here, we've really have shown what the food system is, who all is involved in it, how diverse that is, how many different kinds of players are in it, both urban and rural. I really enjoyed hearing from the representative of Rosario in Argentina talking about urban food systems. I think that's something we don't necessarily hear a lot about, but obviously rural ones are important as well. So just really sort of, touching on the whole scope of the food system today, I think, in this really rich conversation.
Yes, absolutely. I think it also, all of those components that you just described, they really speak to the monumental task of sort of structuring a deliberative process for coming up with solutions, for even figuring out sort of what the problem is or what a solution might comprise. I think that's really, in a lot of ways, we're talking about sort of how do you structure a cooperative process for thinking about the future in this really fundamental way. Of course, the big piece of that, and I think something that we'll probably hear more about tomorrow, is the accountability piece, just to make sure this is not another one of those sort of talking shops. What do you think is going to sort of be the key there? And what are you looking forward to in tomorrow's discussion that might sort of help us think about translating, this discussion into action?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you said it perfectly. The key really is what happens next. And I think we did have the opportunity today to hear from some folks from what they want to see out of this process. But tomorrow we will really be digging into that and talking about, what sort of accountability mechanisms there might be, who's going to be responsible for that, what institutions, if any, can play a role in that. We'll also be talking a little bit further about the financing piece that you mentioned. All of this is not free. There's a reason that it's broken, and the reason it's broken is because it's expensive to fix it, among many. And so who's going to pay for this? Where is this money going to come from? That's something we're going to be chatting about as well.
Great. Well, I'm sure that everyone has a lot to sort of mull over now, and it's helpful to have a little bit of time to do that before we kick off tomorrow. But is there anything else that folks should know, or anything else that you want to say before we sign off for the day?
Yeah, I'll just give another thank you to our sponsors, EFAD and Atlas Network. And we do, of course, hope that you'll all join us again tomorrow, same time, 10 a.m. Eastern time, as we were today. We'll be back tomorrow. We also would love if you check out our content series running on Devex.com right now called The Future of Food Systems. We have just an absolute wealth of content there on all of these topics. So we would love to have you join us on our website and read some of the stories and really great work that we've been producing through that series. And then again, another small plug for the Food Systems newsletter that we will be launching. Again, stay tuned for more information about that. And one final thing, we just wanted to apologize for the technical difficulty that meant that Elijah Addo couldn't join us. Unfortunately, his connection did not allow him to come in on his panel, so we are sorry about that. But again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Michael. It was great to be with you, and we look forward to being back with you all again tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa. Can't wait.